Our next conversation, we can't really talk about AI, can we, without discussing ethics. So the next question that we're going to investigate is, does AI in a crisis need ethics with urgency? And that's a really timely conversation. So please welcome the panelists who are joining us online for our next session, as well as your moderator this morning, Dr. Cindy Gordon, the founder and CEO of SalesChoice. Cindy, over to you.
Well, good morning, everybody, and delighted to be here with the panelists that we have. And I'm calling in from Canada. We've got Bing Song, who's in from China. We've got Ivana, who's calling in from, I'm not exactly sure where you are this morning, but let me just get underway with the guests that we have. I'm just going to dive right into the conversation here, just because of time. Essentially, I wanted just to stage a few questions. Obviously, with COVID-19, we've had a proliferation of problem solving, data collection. We've all been moving very rapidly. There's maybe some implications as a result of that. So I thought I'd start off with Amandeep Singh, who's the project director of I-DAIR. And, if you could just, Amandeep, talk about a little bit in the sense of what you've been researching in your center and some of the challenges, lessons learned, kind of to stage set the realities of crisis in a pandemic. And so we'll start with you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, now we can.
Wonderful. Thanks, Cindy, for that question. So in our work at I-DAIR, we've been focusing on real-time epidemiology and presenting these AI-driven insights to policymakers. So predicting the impact on the health systems, the burden on the health systems by looking at the spread of the pandemic, looking at how the virus itself is mutating, what it means for the public health authorities. And all this work is now strategically organized under a science-based, digitally enabled global pandemic scheme, which is modular in nature and which is being co-constructed with a group of scientific and research partners from across the globe. The problems that we have seen in this pandemic with the digitally enabled response, from contact tracing apps to the genomic sequencing of variants, have been a highlight, have been a feature of our work.
Thanks. Are there any particular perspectives that you have on that data, sharing and the implications for ethics policy setting, Amandeep, based on your experiences?
Cindy, there are three ethical problems that we have come across in our experience. The first is the problem of giving false hopes or making false claims, so that AI, on the basis of audio samples of cough by patients or certain images, X-ray images, can predict the presence of the SARS-CoV-2 virus. So there have been claims that were not borne out on the ground. So that confuses people, particularly policymakers. The other problem is the misuse of personal data. So contact tracing apps collecting data about citizens, but then data being used to enforce certain kinds of social behavior, which is not directly related to the health emergency. The third ethical challenge that we have seen is the missed opportunities to use data science, to use AI. So the data is there because the ethics around its use, around sharing, around collaboration, the governance has not been thought through. People are not able to use it. People are not able to collaborate around it. And you have a great example from Israel, where 600,000 vaccinated people were matched with 600,000 unvaccinated people using the data available because the governance structures were there, and you were able to come out with the first estimates of the effectiveness of vaccines. But there are many other areas where we could have used AI, but were not able to because the ethical and governance schemas were not in place.
Great. Thank you so much, Amandeep. There couldn't be a better perspective in the sense of COVID-19 and the crisis and in some of the aspects of AI ethics. I'm now going to move to Bing Song, who's in China. You know, I guess it's a bit later in your day, Bing Song. And Bing Song's the vice president of the Berggruen Institute and also an avid researcher in this field. So the question we have for you, Bing Song, and you and I spoke about it the other day, is obviously China's recently released some new perspectives on ethics, that was really nice to see. Our conversation that you really wanted to zoom into was the philosophical, some of perspectives and differences that you found in your research to kind of share. I know we don't have a lot of time, but I'm going to give the floor to you to make your comments.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Cindy. Yes, indeed. As you said, actually, China just recently promulgated this, they call it new generation AI norms. And then that was actually promulgated in September. And then actually another thing I want to actually bring to the attention of this audience is that China has also passed the Personal Information Protection Law recently, and it will come into formal effect in November. So this act is actually regulates the collection, storing, processing, and transferring of personal information. They also addresses the issue of data bias, privacy, and data security, which are also relevant for our discussion today. As Amandeep just mentioned that the huge amount of data that's been collected during the pandemic, including the contact tracing and the whole like social behavior, monitoring and this and that. I think that's clearly it's a big issue in China. And then at this point, those apps are still widely deployed and used. This act actually applies to business and government agencies alike. So it will be really interesting to see how this act will be interpreted and actually applied in practice. So it's something to watch, and then so it's a good starting point. Obviously, the fact that this is the first comprehensive law on personal data, but we all know the real stuff is actually in its interpretation and implementation. Anyway, so in the next few minutes, I know we don't have a lot of time, but I would like to share with the audience my general observations on the various AI regulations and ethics initiatives that are coming out of China. The first that I would like to highlight is that the intellectual sources of influence on AI narratives and AI ethics in China actually fall into two general categories. First category of influence is from values of modernity. That's how I call. So they are Western in origin, but have been globalized and absorbed into the local cultural context in the past, close to 200 years. So what are those values? They are the heightened notions of privacy, human autonomy, equal access, and the prevention of discrimination, et cetera, et cetera. So in that sense, Chinese initiatives, be it the norms that was published recently, and also the Personal Information Protection Act that just came into effect, they all closely track European norms, okay, including the GDPR framework. So you're going to see many familiar principles, notions, and mechanisms that in this statutes and rules and guidelines. This is the first source of influence on the ethics and then AI discussions in China. Actually, there were a lot of legal commentaries and then out there who have noted this, the similarities or the sort of the close tracking of the international norms if you review the Chinese ethics principles. However, it would be amiss to really think that we live in a world of sameness, okay, when it comes to value preferences, value priorities, and value aspirations. So it would be even counterproductive to evaluate China's AI ethics related initiatives purely from European or American points of view without regard to local context and the long-standing cultural traditions. So here comes to the second category of intellectual source, which has had a great impact on AI narratives and AI risks discussion in China. They are the long-standing cultural and philosophical traditions of Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism. This is actually the area of work I've been focusing on the past couple of years. So these traditions emphasize cosmological unity, relational thinking, non-anthropocentrism, and the notion of constant change being the essence of the universe. Okay, and then so from this philosophical and cultural point of view, China places much more emphasis on collective and group-oriented values, contextually appropriate analysis and judgment, flexibility, and then adaptability. So in the China context, we would see more emphasis on cooperation, collaboration, piloting projects, or process-oriented approach to ethics and implementation, as well as the notion of agile governance. So there are also many discussions focusing on harmony and human-machine symbiosis. So this is, I wanted to highlight that there are differences or different approaches to ethics and ethics discussions as well. So in my view, the influence of those culture traditions has been grossly underappreciated in global discussions. Merely attributing the differences in notions and practices one observes in China to the authoritarian regime, I think it's intellectual laziness, to say the least, in my view. The fact that different cultures leading to different AI narratives is a plain truth, in my view, okay? So it is true not just in China. You can also see different dynamics at work when it comes to AI narratives in Japan, Korea, Africa, and indigenous communities globally. Here, I would like to commend the fine work on global AI narratives done by the Center on Existential Risks at the Cambridge University, co-founded by Jaan, one of our esteemed panelists here. And at the China Center of the Berggruen Institute, which I'm the director of, has the fortune of working with them closely on AI narratives in China. Here also allow me to highlight one project our China Center has been doing on AI and the Chinese philosophy. We conducted several dialogues and workshops on topics on this very topic since late 2017, and edited a book entitled Intelligence and Wisdom, AI Meets Chinese Philosophers. It was actually just published by Springer, literally like 2 weeks ago. So I do hope all of you can look it up after the conference. So to summarize, there are values and notions which are generally accepted by all, although interpretations and implementation may still differ. But let's not to forget that cultural differences do matter when it comes to value preference, priorities, and aspirations. So honestly, if we live in a world of flat thinking, it would be truly boring and uninspiring. So instead, I hope we can all keep an open mind and respect differences and then try to learn from each other. That's all from me. Thank you, Cindy.
Thank you, Bing Song, for sharing so many perspectives on the philosophical complexities, but also the concept of flat thinking. I think it's very inspiring for us to all appreciate our uniquenesses and differences, and also to underscore the harmony message that you had in your comments. Thank you so much. I'm going to move now to Ivana. Ivana is the Global Privacy Officer at Wipro. And just a real dynamo, tons of energy. Just really looking forward to your comments, Ivana. You're in an interesting position with such a large multinational. And if you could maybe just comment on where you're at with your AI governance practices, some of the operational realities, maybe insights, lessons learned, because obviously moving an organization to have that foundation of ethical and privacy context is very strategic. So we'll turn the floor over to you, Ivana.
Thank you so much, and absolutely delighted to be here with you. I was listening to what you Bing was talking about when she was talking about China, And it's really interesting to see that what we are witnessing is that over the last few years in particular, we've seen a proliferation of ethics governance principles. And these have happened at both organizational level and state level. AI innovation strategies, these have been happening everywhere. At the same time, we have also seen an alignment in privacy law around the world. I mean, at the moment, we're in a context where there are 180 privacy laws across the globe. As was mentioned, from China to Brazil to GDPR to the United States. So we are seeing an alignment in privacy legislation. However, this is happening in the, and whilst at the same time, as there is this alignment of principles and all of this, at the same time, we are seeing a drive to data localization, a drive to national and digital sovereignty. So there is this sort of strange situation where, on the one hand, we are creating a situation of alignment of privacy with the proliferation of legislation. At the same time, it's becoming more difficult to share data, and Schrems 2 in Europe, for those who know, have been a real challenge for a lot of organizations. The reason why I'm mentioning this is because there is, and it's particularly with the pandemic, there is no way that global businesses and any business can really survive in the world we live in without putting privacy ethics at the forefront of whatever we do. And this is because there has been a change in consumers' attitudes. So what we're seeing is consumers paying more attention, citizens paying more attention to the downside, to the harms, the privacy harms, the ethical harms that technologies are bringing alongside the fantastic opportunities that technologies and AI are bringing to the world. So this attention, thanks in particular to the amazing work of activists, academics, thinking about Joy Bull and Winnie, so many, especially women of color, who've been leading in this field over the last decades, and they've been pioneering the need and requirement for an ethical approach to this technology. And ethical, I don't mean just the frameworks and what we're going to use, but I also mean defining whether we really need the technology and what's the aim for that technology in the first place. So the point that I really want to make is that we have seen a change of attitudes around this, which is really, really important. A global alignment on privacy. We are seeing the proliferation of ethical approaches. The company I am proud to work for, and I recently joined as global chief privacy officer. Is a company that is rooted around the world, rooted in historically as an Indian company, and what I'm witnessing from that fantastic observatory really is the all around the world, the attention to privacy, the attention to artificial intelligence, which is done in an ethical way, and we have an ethical framework that we use with clients and organizations into the products that we create and develop ourselves, is becoming a major issue for organizations across the entire globe, and this is really important. The last thing that I really wanted to say is that it's been really interesting how during this whole pandemic, we've been collating a lot of information, and at the same time that we were discussing how to best get out of the pandemic, how to best use the data that we have. Privacy considerations, ethical considerations, they've never taken the back seat. And this is really, really important because it's not just happening in one area of the world, it's been happening everywhere. As we build on the trends of datafication, of the trends of data accumulation, on the trends of surveillance, I think it's really, really important to realize that there is a sort of this completely new attention to these topics. And I think it's important for organizations to really change the narrative in this respect. It's not about offering a trade-off between privacy and health, or privacy and security, privacy and whatever else. But the companies that can lead in the future, I think, are the companies that can offer privacy and health, privacy and security, without that trade-off that is often presented as an easy way out from having the courage to make products that allow citizens and consumers to have their data respected whilst pushing for innovation. So I think what has really changed is the global attitude. All around the world, we're really seeing these issues with a different approach, with of course great cultural differences, greater discussions that we need to have, alignment that, for example, we need to develop on international data sharing. But there is a new awareness, and I think this is important for companies and societies alike.
Thanks so much, Ivana, for such a broad perspective and bringing in the views of the changing attitudes of the consumers, front and center, starting to influence, but also the fact that you're seeing so much consolidation and the perspective of bringing the different views together. At the same time, Bing Song is also reinforcing, let's ensure that we understand the philosophical uniqueness of the different geos as well. It sort of brings the perspective of the complexities that we have in actually advancing as best that we can, as sort of representing maybe the future for the human race as well. Which brings us to, I think, Jaan, I was really fascinated with your title of co-founder of the Existential, Risk Institute. And, that brought up a whole series of perspectives. So I wanted just for you to comment on, given the conversation that we've just had on ethics, what do you think are some of the risks, the existential risks of the human species? It's kind of a provocative way to kind of close out our panel. And what is your center in particular researching on the preventions for the existential risks of humanity? Kind of a very deep conversation. So I'm going to pass it over to you, Jaan, to inspire us and also protect us.
Thank you very much. Yeah, perhaps I should kind of give like an overall overview of like what existential risk research is about, and how it kind of differs from doing research into AI ethics. So like when we think about AI ethics, it's about, or like technology ethics in general is about how can we kind of promote good values or values that we consider good, and kind of in the context of changing technological environment. However, existential risk research is more about how can we survive unprecedented situations that new and potentially sudden technological developments can create on this planet. One great illustration for that is if you look at the history of the nuclear or atomic weapons, then the first detonation of an atomic bomb happened in 1945. But the concept of nuclear chain reaction was invented 12 years before that. So during that 12 years, humanity lived with a really real existential risk because it wasn't known whether this planet can survive the first nuclear detonation. And indeed, the first existential risk research that humanity has produced was called Report LA602. That was produced by the Manhattan Project scientists who did the calculations whether the atmosphere of the Earth will sustain, will not ignite as a result of the first atomic bomb test. And more generally, like if you think about new technologies like synthetic biology, this planet hasn't seen kind of man-made organisms. And it's possible that they would be kind of very catastrophic from an environmental perspective. And more relevantly for this conference and also my interests, I think it's kind of important to do our homework when it comes to preparing ourselves for a situation where humans might no longer be the smartest decision makers on this planet. And even worse, for a situation where the smartest decision makers are silicon-based and just do not share like many, if any, values with humanity.
So Jaan, can you maybe expand in terms of some of the research that you're doing? I think that gives us good context of sort of the foundation of your center, but would love to just hear some perspectives on the research and any of the insights, and maybe even in some key questions for everyone that's in the audience, because we've got such a global group together.
Yeah, so I'm not like super well versed in the exact research that is being done because I'm involved on the board level at the Cambridge Center, and I've kind of more generally over the last 10 years I've been trying to cultivate an ecosystem in the world, and in that context, I'm very glad with collaborations with Bing Song Center and whatnot. But it's like, just to give you an example of research that is being done, everybody can go to a place like alignmentforum.org. There's like a discussion about specifically what are the things that what are the missing pieces of information or missing pieces of knowledge that we need in order to be able to kind of steer and control things that are potentially smarter than us. And they're, so yeah, I would probably just like stop there because we don't have too much time. I could go on for a long time about.
Well, Jaan, just thank you so much for those, I think, very reflective comments. We're actually at the top of the time now to open it up for questions. We've got actually one key question, and I'm going to ask each of the panelists to respond to the first question that's just come in. So imagine that you're each now head of planet Earth. We've parachuted forward, and we actually have an AI governance structure in place. And now you're being asked to put forth the first legal regulation that you'd like to enact for ethics in a crisis. What would be your first motion? So I'm going to let maybe Amandeep start, and it's just get a wave your wish, your wish wand. What would you legalize immediately as a call to action? You're now the captain of planet Earth. Amandeep, what would you do?
Thank you. That's a great question, a real challenge, though. I think my first priority would be to hardwire and incentivize distributed approaches to governance, which respect local ownership of data, community ownership of data and technologies, and which allow this paradigm shift from data protection to data empowerment to knowledge empowerment, where the benefits of AI are coming back to those who are contributing through their data for building those technologies. So that would be the first foremost thing I'll put in there. In fact, it's a current challenge as well, what Wipro is doing across different teams across the globe, and what we focused on, researchers and developers from different domains, different geographies. Even today, there is fragmentation of governance. We need a distributed scheme that allows collaborators, private sector, public sector, nonprofit, to work together in well-governed ways.
Thanks, Amandeep. What a wonderful message to data empowerment, to knowledge empowerment as your first call to action as Captain Ethics Earth. Ivana, we just have time probably for your comments here. It's been advised that we're a little bit over. So Ivana, what would you do?
I think for me, the most important thing is that I think we need to understand what we want this technology to do. And I think what was just said about data is absolutely important. So one of the things that I would really like to look at is what are the ways that we handle the data moving forward in a way which allows citizens to exert some control, moving beyond traditional forms of, for example, consent mechanism, looking at different ways of handling data, so that there could be one of the principles, for example, of the European approach in the Governance Act in the European is data altruism. Can we identify at global level new ways of handling this data, of creating new intermediaries, and there are so much research happening at the moment on data trust, data cooperatives, and it would be really good to see something like this happening on a bigger scale, because I think that is really important and allows the data that organizations need and to continue to develop. But at the same time, we really need to take into considerations the issue of control over data that the citizens are really asking to exercise. And one thing I would actually do would be to there is a need of this global, much more global approach to AI. And there are avenues that we are exploring. The European Union is doing the sort of the European AI Act. There are a lot of different approaches that can be used. But I think creating a place where at international level we can discuss about harms, about what AI can and cannot, must not do. I think that is absolutely crucial to move on for AI that works for the world and for everybody.
Thanks so much. Thanks so very much, Ivana, for the perspectives. I've just been advised that I need to wrap up. So on behalf of World Summit AI, I would just like to give a very sincere thank you to our panelists, for Bing Song coming in from China. Thank you so much. Jaan, for sharing your perspectives on existential risk. Ivana, yours, and also Amandeep. And enjoy the rest of your sessions, everyone. Thank you so much.